Welcome. I'm in a park here in Tulsa, so if you hear some background noise, my apologies. I want to thank Khalil, Nisha, and all the CME committee people for organizing this event. It's going to be a very important event. Because when we were in medical school, nobody talked about climate and health effects of climate, but now more importance has come for climate and climate causing diseases. It's a very important topic. So I want to thank all the speakers this evening, Dr. Asha, Dr. Savita, Madhu, and Anup, Anupam. Thank you so much. I want to remind you again about the Atlanta Convention on August 13 and 14. It's a two-day event, and if you're not registered, please register. Unfortunately, things are not great in India. A lot of people are dying and suffering from COVID. So we'll also plan some donation from AKMG. We will talk about it in the governing body tomorrow and then make a decision. So need your help and we'll try to contribute for the oxygen cylinders and other items which we need in India. Thank you so much. Enjoy the meeting, and I think Khalil will take over now. Thanks, Khalil.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. Welcome to today's AKMG CME program. As Dr. Bhatt mentioned, the theme of today's meeting is health impacts of climate change. For AKMG, the goal of CME events is to address broad issues that are relevant to all, irrespective of one's specialty, as well as focus on areas that are often underrepresented in traditional CME events. As physicians, we are increasingly becoming aware of the critical role of weather and climate in health and disease. In fact, the biggest health crisis of our time, COVID itself, can be traced directly to climate change. When species go extinct, the innate microbial flora of that species are forced to jump species. And as being the most successful and numerous of the mammals, we humans tend to be the receiving end of these interspecies jumps of microbes. From AIDS to COVID, the origin of these deadly zoonotic diseases can be traced directly to climate change and human-induced species extinction. I thank Nisha and Jill for suggesting this especially important topic as the theme of today's CME. We have an exceptionally talented group of speakers for today's program. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Dr. Manju Nair, is unable to join today due to a family emergency. We should have her speak at our next CME event. Our first talk is on the impact of climate change on the kidneys, aptly titled, sorry about that, aptly titled Climate Change and Kidney Disease, the Canary in the Coal Mine. The speaker is Dr. Madhu Bhaskaran, my friend and a year senior from Calicut Medical College. During college days, Madhu was the quintessential Buji, a short form of Buddhijeevi, which some of you are familiar with. It used to be a term of endearment in a college full of nerds. Being a Buji was being cool. He is now a professor of medicine and surgery at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra, Northwell. After training from Calicut Medical College, he did his postgraduate training in the prestigious Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research in Chandigarh in nephrology and kidney transplantation. He continued his clinical training in nephrology at the Long Island Jewish Medical Center and trained in cellular and molecular biology. He also received additional clinical training in transplantation at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. At Northwell Health, Madhu helped set up the kidney transplant program, initially in collaboration with Mount Sinai and subsequently independently at the North Shore University Hospital. His clinical expertise is in the field of nephrology, transplantation, and clinical nutrition. He is board certified in internal medicine and nephrology. His current research interests include applied genetics in the field of nephrology and transplantation, novel therapies, and predictors of short and long-term kidney function in transplantation and social determinants affecting transplant access and outcome. He's also an active member of the Northwell Health COVID-19 Research Consortium and a core faculty at the Nephrology Fellowship Training Program. I welcome Madhu to give this very important talk as the start of our program.
Thank you, Ashraf, for that very kind introduction. And extremely happy to be here. And thank you very much for organizing this wonderful CME program. Very relevant and unusual. And I want to thank all my seniors from Calicut Medical College, including our wonderful president, Dr. Bhatt, Dr. Majid Padwana, former president of AKMG. And thank you, CME committee, for asking me to speak on this topic, which should be dear to all of us. So I'm currently in New York, and I've gone through all these places, starting at Calicut, then Chandigarh, then Bronx, and then now at Long Island. Um, so in the last year, it has been really hard for most of us who have been touched by the COVID pandemic, especially New York, when in last year, exactly at the same time, all of us felt a little bit like a canary sitting in that coal mine, going into the hospital every day. Most of you know what canaries used to be used for before we had sophisticated instruments looking for carbon monoxide and other noxious gases in the coal mine. These little birds provided the lifeline for miners who would watch them carefully for any sign of toxic gases and save themselves. And so I thought, as a first warning of, major non-communicable diseases, kidney diseases will, likely play a similar kind of a role. And non-communicable diseases, as you know, until this last 1 year when the pandemic took over, were taking the forefront of human morbidity and mortality. And we're taking over from infectious diseases. But now the pandemic has taken over and probably likely be in the forefront again. But kidney diseases have become a part of the pandemic. As you can see, the number of reports of kidney injury in COVID patients and the amount of burden of kidney disease that is happening all over the world. So we'll touch upon from the context of climate change, which I think is aptly should be talked by people who are more trusted than the current speakers on the topic, which is mostly politicians and other business leaders who seem to be making it a fashion to talk about climate change and green technologies. But it looks like people need to hear it from someone who they will listen to and understand it better and take more seriously from, such as medical professional. So these talks today will be very relevant, to make this an important agenda for in everyone's lives. So the kidney diseases are a leading cause of death in the world. If you look at America, 37 million Americans are affected. 750,000 patients are on end-stage renal disease care, and 100,000 start dialysis every year. 60% of those who start dialysis die within 5 years. And this slide from the World Congress of Nephrology for the second year on virtual platform just concluded this week. And this slide, which was tweeted by Dr. Vivekanand Jha, who is the current president of International Society of Nephrology and my teacher from Chandigarh, clearly shows the essence of the most important topic that is relevant in everyone's mind at the Congress, which is the amount of patients that are dying without receiving care.
Madhu, sorry to interrupt. Could you please share the slide? You have to, share the screen.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf, for sorry that omission on my part. So these are the institutions that I went through during my my training, the first one being Calicut and then Chandigarh and then Bronx and Long Island. And this is a, a cartoon of this is actually a memorial for cannery in Colorado. And the other one is a picture of canary bird in a coal mine. And we talked about the scope of kidney diseases in the world and in United States. And this slide shows the number of patients that are dying every year in the world. You can see only about a quarter of patients who really need, life-saving treatment for kidney disease actually get it. And everyone else, unfortunately, dies, even though treatment is available. So, that's a huge number of patients dying. And, this slide carefully kind of, hides the places where people are dying. And, you can imagine where they may be. So what has happened over the last many decades is the world has become warmer. If you live in New York and in January and February, a warmer world would be a welcome change. But if you take the global picture, this warming of the world has really caused major trouble across the world in terms of climate change, in terms of expansion of, as Dr. Ashraf mentioned, the zoonotic diseases spilling over to other species, leading to pandemics such as this, or possibly future worse pandemics. And so this cartoon from this week shows the amount of temperature increases that has happened over one thing is very clear, that temperature has increased all over the world. And in parts such as in Central Asia, the increase in temperature as high as 6 degrees. And if you take on an average, the increase in temperature is about 0.8 degrees. So more than the average increase in temperature, what really causes health changes or peril to a large number of population in the world, which has swelled to about 8 million over the last many decades, 8 billion actually. And you can see the heat wave exposure to millions of people, the magnitude and the amount of population that is exposed to the heat waves has increased. And these are well documented data and published information. So over the last 50 years, an average increase in temperature is 0.8 degrees, but the increased exposure to heat waves to larger number of population has really caused health effects in them. And the health effects from heat waves have caused more mortality than the more documented and dramatic climatic changes such as tornadoes, hurricanes, and lightning strikes. Those who are watching the news in 2003 remember the heat wave in Europe, especially in France, and 73,000 people died there, and in India in 2014 and 15, and in Pakistan in 2015. So these are big heat waves causing major mass casualty. Heat associated diseases, I'm focusing on kidney related. Heat stroke, which could be clinical and subclinical. People may not complain, and some people who are not used to it will complain about it. And rhabdomyolysis, more dramatic effect of a acute exposure to heat. Heat induced inflammation, which could be chronic, and recurrent heat injury and dehydration, chronic kidney disease, kidney stones, recurrent urinary tract infections, and occupational heat stress and kidney disease, of which I will mostly focus on heat stress related kidney disease, because most of the others are well documented and everyone knows about them, related to mostly dehydration and access to good water source. So, heat stroke causing rhabdomyolysis and acute tubular injury. Those who have worked in Northern India or in Middle East have seen these patients, especially in laborers who are exposed to heat without air conditioning. And chronic heat-related kidney injury causing oxidative stress, interstitial inflammation, hyperuricemia, concentrated acidic urine causing tubular injury. I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, there was big population-based statistical studies on what is the cause of end-stage renal disease and chronic kidney disease in India. And the Northern Indian papers showed chronic glomerular nephritis, whereas Southern Indian paper from Chennai, Dr. Mani, showed it was chronic interstitial nephritis. And some of them might be related to heat stress, because those were the days when people didn't really think of heat in Chennai or southern India has a major problem. There was not much air conditioning going on, and people got used to the temperature, but their bodies did take a toll from them. And kidney disease might have been one manifestation of this uncontrolled and perilous exposure to heat. Effects of hyperosmolality like hyperglycemia, hypoxia, and it leads to metabolic changes such as fructokinase pathway, increasing fructose intake. And now you know with the availability of fructose containing soft drinks, there is a lot of exposure to fructose, and we know that that is not good for the kidneys. And it leads to vasopressin. And even though, you want to have a chilled, soft drink when you're thirsty in the exposed heat, that may be doing more harm than good, and you feel more thirsty afterwards. And there is acute and chronic effects of vasopressin-induced tubular injury and glomerular injury in the kidney. And sugarcane workers in the Pacific coast of Central America, agriculture workers in Mexico, Central Florida, and even California in the United States, they are exposed to heat stress, leading to damage in their kidneys. And this is so common in the Central America. It was dubbed as Mesoamerican nephropathy because it is really kidney disease of in the past unknown and currently thought to be from heat stress. So on top of all this, there are nephrotoxic agrochemicals. There are countries where the regulation is not as strict or as enforced. As we know, we have many pesticides that were in use in Southeast Asian countries with no antidote even. And some of them get exposed. They have concentrated exposure in the population through their groundwater source. It makes it to their food chain and cause major organ damages, including liver and kidney. Heavy metals, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which are widely available over the counter, they don't help either. Tobacco use, which is prevalent, and silica exposure in industries where silica exposure is common, including manufacturing and in construction. Fructose-containing soft drinks we talked about. And if you look at the mechanisms, going through a little bit more in detail, because this is not talked about as much as we talk about other causes of kidney disease. Low-grade rhabdomyolysis, hyperosmolality, hyperthermia, extracellular volume depletion, all of them lead to physiological changes that lead to eventually a fall in GFR, which is out of proportion to what would happen with natural process of aging. So that will lead to a development of end-stage disease during the lifetime of the person, necessitating very expensive and unavailable care, as you can see. So there are a couple of things that seem to be, very common in these patients, including high uric acid level, which, as you know, is very common in Kerala and other southern states of India, and also chronic interstitial nephritis of unknown etiology, that is happening from the heat stress and the heat waves that have become so prevalent in those parts of the world, and repeated acute kidney injury. And even in children, diarrheal diseases because of lack of access to potable water, leading to acute kidney injuries, urinary tract infections repeatedly causing acute inflammation in the kidney can all lead to chronic interstitial fibrosis, eventually causing damage to the overall available functioning kidney tissue. So if you look at the unknown CKD epidemic sites, and you can clearly see that, we have very well-known documented increased incidence of CKD in parts of India where, epidemiology teams have gone from the West even to being interested in studying this. And you can see the heat waves as the dark red color in parts of India, such as Andhra Pradesh, now Andhra and Telangana, and certain part of Maharashtra, Orissa. These places have increased incidence of chronic kidney disease, and these are the areas which are ravaged by the heat waves because of the changes in the climate. So there are other parts of the world that are also affected by the heat waves. There are confirmed sites such as Central America, in Costa Rica, Guanacaste area, Nicaragua, Leon and Chinandega area, in El Salvador, Guatemala, and in Southeast Asia, as I mentioned, Andhra Pradesh, and in Sri Lanka, north central region of Sri Lanka. There are some suspected sites where it's most likely happening. Goa, kind of an unusual place where there are not that many heat waves, but there are some exposure to heat there. Odisha and Maharashtra, in parts of Thailand and Middle East and Saudi Arabia, it's a desert, so heat is very prevalent there. Parts of Egypt, South Sudan, again in Africa, Mexico, certain parts of Mexico, and even California Central Valley, the land of endless summers and, heat waves now, causing heat stress nephropathy. So what are the countermeasures we can take in this situation? Adequate hydration. Again, that, huge number of population have no adequate supply of potable water, including 700 million children live without good water source. Prevent overheating in vulnerable populations, heat warning systems when it's possible, changes in occupational practices, public health initiatives, and scientific investigations to slow, stop, and reverse global warming as a strategy to help in this situation. So as you know, diabetes and hypertension form a major part of morbidity causing kidney disease. For 50 million people living with diabetes globally, 8% of the world's population, 40% will develop chronic kidney disease, and 70% of kidney disease happen in patients with diabetes and hypertension. And what has happened, so whatever is happening in this situation is also relevant for kidney disease. Rise in diabetics and non-communicable disease are linked to climate change. Global food inequality driving type 2 diabetes because people go to less healthy choices for their food, which is cheap and available in large quantities. Adverse outcomes in diabetics during heat waves, such as impaired thermoregulatory mechanism and the autonomous nervous system response, which are impaired in diabetics, make them more susceptible to the effects of high temperature. Electrolyte imbalances, deterioration of kidney function, more visits to hospital, hospitalization, and morbidity and mortality obviously happening as a result of this in this particular group of patients. 10% of world population faces water shortage, and you can see these water ATMs, which are prevalent in some parts of the world. But all this is happening with if the future prediction of the world map in 2100, if sea level rise, there's plenty of water everywhere, but there's not enough potable water, and we could be drowning in water if we don't really address the climate change. So, we had the Earth Day this week, and we had the World Kidney Day last month, and we are looking at kidney disease as a potential marker for what's happening in the on Earth, and it could be a manifestation in humans of what's happening in Earth, which could be damaging our ability to live on this wonderful planet. So, or is it, the ravages of mankind on Earth, such as deforestation? You can see the upper and lower cartoon showing the effect of deforestation. The green forests are disappearing fast, and maybe the nature is fighting back, and the Earth is burning. And this aerial photograph shows the funeral pyres in India in last week from the pandemic. And maybe there is nature crying because of what is happening in the environment. So it is very relevant to listen to our, literary figures. In Wilderness is the Preservation of the World by Henry David Thoreau's famous statement in his essay called Walking. And so I think it's time we sit, think, and talk about it, and what we do to the environment and what we can do better to help us live on this planet a bit longer. I will stop there and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madhu, for that excellent overview on the climate change and kidney diseases. Again, I totally agree that again, things that we do at this time can not only help us live longer, but also our future generations enjoy the things that we enjoyed in our childhood. So with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Anupam Kumar. So Dr. Anupam Kumar, I would like to call him as another Buji from Toronto Medical College. So he is 2 years senior to me in medical school. I consider him as my own big brother and also a mentor who helped me through this journey into the US through the USMLE. So he graduated from Toronto Medical College. He did his residency and in University of Connecticut. He was also a chief resident there, and he did his fellowship in pulmonary critical care in Cleveland Clinic. He is currently the assistant professor of medicine in Division of Pulmonary Critical Care and Lung Transplant at Baylor College of Medicine. His primary areas of interest include ARDS, lung transplantation, interstitial lung disease. He's also a member of the American College of Chest Physicians Lung Transplant Steering Committee. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Anupam Kumar for the next talk.
Thank you, Anup. Thank you for the kind introduction. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
And I'm very visible. You guys can see my virtual background on Earth, right? In outer space?
Yes.
Well, I was searching for a good virtual background on Earth's Day, but I think it's not that impressive. So I'm actually going to go back to my no filters, actually. Okay, am I back on Earth now?
Back to reality.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen here. Great. So again, thank you for the kind introduction. And that was an awesome talk by Dr. Madhu Bhaskaran. I really enjoyed it. Frankly, in all honesty, I myself I was not very much aware of the impact of climate change on kidney. I mean, it was more perceivable that it could affect lungs and heart, but I was always curious, like what would it do to the kidney? So it was very enlightening talk. Thank you so much. Obviously we celebrated Earth's Day very recently. So this is a very timely topic in that context, very relevant. And I must say that very under-recognized still in the scientific community, certainly among doctors. We are finally starting to talk about it, have dialogues about it, and sort of recognize our role in carving the path forward. So on Earth's Day 2021, the decision was to build the world's largest environmental movement to drive transformative change for people and the planet. But how far have we come? So in 2016, of course, several countries signed the landmark Paris Agreement, where the countries pledged to limit the global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Fast forward to 2021, not only has there been a rise in global average temperature of about 1.2 degrees Celsius, we actually recorded the 5 hottest years since 2015. So there is no denying that climate change is real. I mean, we are frankly living as if we have another planet to go to. There is no planet B at the moment. And I know we are looking at Mars as a prospect and things, but we really got to do a lot of work here so that we can, have a better living and do something better for the future generations as well. So a little bit about climate change. So you cannot go forward without talking about the greenhouse effect. So what is a natural greenhouse effect, and what are we humans doing to that? And frankly, you will realize at the end of this talk that human beings at this moment are the weapons of mass destruction. So, you have the sun, whether it's solar radiation that is falling on Earth, and normally this heat gets reflected. And so you have a normal layer of greenhouse gases with carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and several other gases. And what this layer of greenhouse gases do is it sort of acts as an insulation. A lot of heat escapes into the space. A lot of it is absorbed, and a little amount of heat goes back into Earth. So that is how our Earth is kept at a very acceptable temperature for all ecosystems to thrive. So without these normal greenhouse gases, our temperature would be about negative 18 degrees Celsius. Now with greenhouse gases, now this is a normal situation, we are at about plus 14 degrees Celsius, and that is why, like I said, all ecosystems thrive together, there is symbiosis. But what have we done with deforestation, with combustion of fossil fuels, and everything that we are doing? What happened is we have enhanced the greenhouse effect. So you can see that this layer of greenhouse is now more prominent. So essentially, we have over-insulated the Earth. As a result, a lot more heat falls back on the Earth, the original heat that's coming from the sun. And so therefore, it has resulted in warming up of the climate. So again, this is what results in increase in, or what causes global warming. And as you can see here, if you record all the way from the early 1900s all the way to 2020, you can see that there has been an increase in temperature. You can also see here, if you look at all the industrialized countries, as you go from 1980 into the 2000s, you can see that the extent of heat wave exposure in that time span for people older than 65 is quite substantial. But climate change is not the same as global warming. Global warming is part of climate change. Climate change encompasses a lot more than global warming. It also includes long-term changes in weather events. So for example, we are seeing a lot more weather events such as floods, wildfires, increasing sea levels, and whatnot. So altogether, it was what causes climate change. So like I said, so there is air pollution, there are changes in vector ecology, there are increasing allergens, water quality impacts, environmental degradation, there is extreme heat. All of these have manifold effects on the ecological system. But when I confine myself to respiratory system, perhaps the most important ones are right here, with air pollution having an impact on asthma, COPD, and cardiovascular diseases. Increasing allergens having an impact on respiratory allergies, asthma, and heat-related illnesses caused by extreme heat. So when it comes to climate change and respiratory health outcomes, like I discussed before, air pollution, increased air pollution causes asthma, COPD, and respiratory infections. Aeroallergens, especially increased pollen, mold, has been implicated in asthma and rhinitis. There is considerable respiratory morbidity and mortality because of extremes of heat and cold, particularly in the context of wildfire exposures in places like California and even in Canada. And then, of course, there are floods and natural disasters, which causes extreme stress, asthma exacerbations, but also infections. And so the American Lung Association has recognized that there are some profound effects of climate change on lungs, particularly pinpointing events such as high heat, ozone, forest fires, and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about air pollution, because this is sort of the elephant in the room right now. And especially if you see that sober graph there of how India is faring. But air pollution right now contributes to about 7 million deaths prematurely every year. And that includes, if you see the statistic from WHO, about 21% due to pneumonia, 19% from COPD, and 7% from lung cancer. So respiratory health together, so that is about 47% of morbidity and mortality from climate change on lung health. And so if you look at countries, spanning continents, you can see that the effects are variable, but in South Asia, especially in countries like India, it is supposed to cause about 17% of premature deaths as well. And if you look at global ranking of risk factors by total number of deaths from all causes for all ages and sexes in 2017 statistic, you can see here that total air pollution is number 5. And if you look at that bar graph here, chronic respiratory diseases, along with neoplasms, respiratory infections, is about 50% of those. So it is a very important risk factor. It is a leading cause of death. It's something that is not quite obvious because we just live with it, and it's part of our daily living right now. But that's why I said it's the elephant in the room, and we better start addressing it. And even for children, air pollution is a global health issue. I mean, in these countries, particularly in countries in South Asia and Africa, it's estimated that 93% of all children and 630 million of children under 5 years are exposed to air pollution. So you see a lot more of allergies and asthma in kids who are born in this era. So let's talk a little bit about ozone, because when you have 2 oxygen molecules, you get oxygen, and that's what everybody needs right now. That's definitely what India needs right now, is oxygen. But when you have a little too much of oxygen, then that's end up not being very good. It becomes ozone. So what ozone does is, if you look at this diagram here, so you have the radiation from sun, which has the ultraviolet A, B, and C. The ultraviolet A just goes right through, and there are 2 zones. One is the stratosphere, which is where all the ozone is. And that actually acts as a natural sunscreen for the Earth. It shields life from dangerous ultraviolet radiation, especially ultraviolet B and C. What happens, and 90% of ozone is in stratosphere. So that's a normal good ozone. Now the bad ozone is what occurs when you have emissions or like a combustion of fossil fuels, what forms as smog or the surface level ozone. Now that doesn't go all the way into the stratosphere. That actually deposits right here, very close to the ground. It causes increased temperature, and that is a zone called the troposphere. And essentially smog is pollutants that are reacting with sunlight and forming photochemical toxins. And that's why you have all these appearances. Sometimes you get out of home to commute to work, especially in places like Delhi, Calcutta, and Bombay. Now we have done some work on that. We have realized that we need the good ozone, and so we recognize that there are certain ozone depleting substances we should be avoiding. The big one was CFC, or chlorofluorocarbons, and so that was banned. And so you can see here that the consumption of ozone depleting substances fell rapidly and dramatically from 1980s all the way to 2014. And that actually caused repletion of the ozone layer in the stratosphere. So there has been some ozone healing that we have successfully done, but that is for the good ozone. We have not really worked on the pollution and the smog that is still very prevalent, especially in developing countries. So what does ozone do? It has been shown that even short-term exposure to ozone, even up to 8 hours, can cause changes in lung function. Patients can be symptomatic with, it's almost like a pneumonia or like an acute reactive airway disease or an acute asthma attack. Patients can have a cough, some throat irritation, pain, burning, chest discomfort, chest tightness. They can have wheezing or auscultation. The good thing is when you have short-term exposure or sporadic exposure, these effects are very reversible. And there can be improvement in recovery to baseline. But when you have this exposure over a long period of time, it can have profound effects on lung. And I don't mean to make this a biochemical lecture, but I think pictures speak 1,000 words. So what you can see here is the bronchoscopic view of this is a normal lung right here. And you can see here the airways of a person who had acute ozone exposure. You can see there is more erythema inflammation. Now, at the electronic microscopic level, this is what happens when you have prolonged ozone exposure. There is desquamation of the epithelial cells. And this is actually an experiment that was done in mice where they actually exposed normal lungs to normal mice lungs to filtered air, which is what FA stands for. And this is a normal bronchiole with all these alveoli, which is areas of gas exchange. And this is the ozone exposed lung. You can see there is desquamation of epithelial cells. There is abundance of inflammatory substrate. What ozone does, it actually creates a very oxidative environment. So there is formation of reactive oxidant species. There is a hyperinflammatory state. It causes bronchoconstriction. And over long term, it can even cause irreversible bronchoconstriction, which is essentially asthma or even phenotypes such as emphysema and COPD. Studies have also shown that long-term effects of ozone, long-term exposure to ozone can actually cause reduced lung function. So you can see here compared to the normal population, there is loss of airflow, there is loss of lung capacity, and collectively, what happens is decrease in lung function, susceptibility to infection. There is a pyramid effect where there are more doctor visits, loss of work, effects on quality of life, ER visits, and even death over a long period of time. The other thing about air pollution that we need to address is exposure to particulate matter, or PM 2.5. Essentially, particulate matter is a complex mixture of solids and liquids suspended in the air. Now, so it essentially means, these are classified based on aerodynamic diameter. So I'm comparing the particle size to human hair. Human hair is about 50 to 70 micrometers, PM less than 2.5, which is essentially what we breathe in, is the combustion particles. It can be natural sources such as dust, sea, salt, wildfires, anthropogenic emissions, household wood, coal burning. So essentially PM 2.5 is what you inhale when your lungs are exposed to air pollution. But remember that particulate matter may also contain organic components such as aromatic hydrocarbons and even biologic components such as fungi, spores, and viruses, which are actually less than 0.1 micrometer. So based on the size of the particulate matter, it deposits in different areas of the lung, but PM 2.5 can very well go all the way down to the alveoli and cause profound effects. Now, this is a map of American air pollution compared to the map of Indian air pollution. And you can see that there are parts of America where the PM 2.5 exposure is above national average. But if you look at the statistic of the metropolitan cities in India, it's really sad. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, and the air quality that we are breathing in those cities it's terrible. I'm not going to go into details about wildfires, but we have certainly seen a lot of wildfires, the campfires in California, Canada. But the statistic here shows the PM2.5 exposure after a wildfire event. There are a lot of ER visits, doctor visits, urgent care visits after the wildfire events in California, for example. And you can see here that this gray area denotes the smoke traveling. And you can see here that in areas where there is dense smoke, there are more red dots, which basically shows the unhealthy amount of PM2.5 exposure. So what does particulate matter over a long period of time do to the lungs? Essentially, it causes a defective airway epithelial host defense function. So it reduces mucociliary clearance. It causes increased pathogen adhesion. It breaks down the epithelial barrier. As a result, there is overall reduced phagocytosis and reduced antimicrobial activity. There is also alteration of the respiratory microecology. So the indigenous microflora, remember, our lungs are sterile, but our upper airways have microorganisms. So a long-term exposure PM2.5 can actually alter the microflora. There is also insufficiency and dysfunction of the immune cells, where there is depletion of alveolar macrophages and natural killer cells. So clearly, the long-term exposure to PM2.5 has impact on not just cross impact on the airway integrity, but also on the immunity function. So climate change and infections, I know Dr. Nair was supposed to give the talk, and I know she will at a future day, but clearly climate change has an impact on respiratory infections. And you can see here, this is a graph essentially showing the association between incidence of confirmed human case of avian influenza and changes in concentration of carbon dioxide. You can see here that as the parts per million of the carbon dioxide goes up, there has been increase in cases of bird flu, the avian influenza. Now, this is before COVID-19. So clearly, every talk these days, we have to see if there is any relationship with COVID-19. And so people have looked at the impact of particulate matter exposure on COVID-19 outcomes. Why not? And this was from Cincinnati. And clearly, you can see that all patients with some respiratory disease, whether it's asthma or COPD, whether it's average PM2.5 exposure or maximal 2.5 exposure, there is an increased risk for hospitalizations, ICU hospitalizations for people who have been exposed to high amount of particulate matter when they have COVID-19. Now, this doesn't affect people without respiratory diseases. So it is possible that the particulate matter had some impact on the lung function already, which makes them susceptible. At the microscopic level, there is already hypothesis that PM2.5 exposure can actually increase the risk of COVID-19. So chronic exposure to PM2.5 causes upregulation of the ACE2 receptors. So what it does is it increases the viral burden. And when you have a high viral load that combines with the nitrogen oxide that is present in PM2.5, eventually that can cause a depletion of the ACE2, and that's what predisposes some of these patients to acute respiratory distress syndrome or ARDS. Now, this is an hypothesis based on the study. When COVID-19 started, at least there's some sign that, oh this might be good for the planet. Maybe this is an opportunity to reset the button and start from scratch, because you see here, there were these images from China in Jan 2020 to Feb 2020 when lockdown was imposed. You can see that there was a reduction in, actually an improvement in air quality index, which is a reduction in particulate matter exposure. And then this group here in Nature actually tracked human activity and calculated daily and cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. So the red panels here means these patients, there are people who are sheltered. So they tracked iPhones and see if people are mostly indoors. And you can see here that as the sheltering intensity increased in all of these big places, especially New York, California, so the taller graphs means that people are mostly sheltered. You can see here that the carbon dioxide emissions actually came down. So that is probably the only good thing that came out of COVID-19, in my opinion. So talking about pollen in a little bit, again, increased carbon dioxide emissions because of greenhouse effect also causes increased grams of ragweed production. Now we are in the pollen season, it's spring and summer. And so over time, since the 90s, you can see that as the carbon dioxide has gone up, the ragweed production has gone up as well. And it's postulated that if the carbon dioxide emissions continue to go up, there will be substantial increase in ragweed pollen production. And not just the production, it will also increase the amount of days that the ragweed pollen is going to be around, which means you will have more allergic symptoms for a longer period of time. Now, this has also resulted in adverse health outcomes. Clearly, there is a lot more allergic rhinitis, allergic asthma. You are starting to see more adults who never had problems with rhinitis and asthma before present with these kind of symptoms. I mean, there might be other contributory factors, but it's possible that is also because of climate change. And certainly that can translate into increased ER visits as well. So I was very curious, what are we doing in the world for climate change? So I started looking at some surveys to see what is the public perception for climate change. And frankly, I was pleasantly surprised. I think people are starting to accept that climate change is real. I mean, especially in America, we can rely on earthworms and rodents for predicting climate change, but climate change is a scientific fact and some people have a hard time accepting it. But clearly across the world, climate change is being accepted more and more, except for some outliers. What about the scientific community? I personally think the doctor community, the healthcare community has lagged behind in coming forward and taking responsibility for this. But if you start looking at statistics and publications from 2007 onwards, there are a lot more original research and non-original research talking about climate change. So both of these are encouraging signals. Recently, American College of Physicians, along with American Lung Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, I think Dr. Krishnamurthy is going to talk about some of these things, what clinicians can do. But I highly recommend you guys looking at this American College of Physicians Climate Change Toolkit. It's available for everybody. It even has slides and documents in very simple language for patients. But essentially, we are starting to move forward. ACP did publish their position paper on climate change in 2016, but I think more work needs to be done very clearly, but I think finally we're starting to move forward. I'll leave you behind with this very sobering statistic from India, where clearly we need help. I know AKMG is working on it. We are seeing about 300,000 cases every day. The death rate continues to increase. And these are not pictures from a wildfire. These are basically burning pyres in different parts of India. I think Dr. Bhaskaran showed this paper. I think this came in New York Times, and it's really heartbreaking. I will leave you with this message from the famous Mahatma Gandhi, who basically said that Earth has enough to provide for everybody's needs, but certainly doesn't have enough for every man's greed. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to questions in the end.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for that enlightening talk. At some of those slides, I had to hold my breath thinking about what's next when it comes to the future generations. Thank you again for that wonderful talk. As for the next speaker, I like to introduce somebody who is actually from my own hometown of Guruvayur, and I looked up to her as my school senior. And then I saw her as my senior in medical college. And then fast forward to right now, she is a oncologist in North America. So I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Asha Karipot, who is a gastrointestinal medical oncologist at the Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She is an adjunct assistant professor of internal medicine, medical oncology at the Oklahoma State University. She completed her medical degree at Calicut University, India, and her residency in internal medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine of New York. She also worked as a chief fellow while completing her fellowship in hemato-oncology at the Sexton Hall University in New Jersey. She has practiced from a variety of settings, starting from a small community private practice, an urban oncology center, an academic environment, as well as a medical director of an infusion center. She has been the lead member in implementing a peptide receptor radionuclide therapy for neuroendocrine tumors at CTCA Tulsa. She does have faculty position at Arkansas College of Osteopathic Medicine, a member of all the key oncology and hematology associations, author of peer-reviewed journals and abstracts in national conferences. She has served as a course director for the Medscape GI program. In addition to her patient care responsibilities, she has served as a chair of the Commission on Cancer Committee, member of Precision Medicine Committee, and member of Medical Executive Committees, and also sits on the Policy and Advocacy Panel and as the Practice Guidelines Implementation Network, and also in the Clinical Practice Committee of American Society of Clinical Oncology. So join me in welcoming Dr. Karipot for her talk on climate change, the impact on cancer.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I hope everyone can see me and hear me clearly.
Yep.
I think that is yes, yeah, okay. And thank you, AKMG CME committee, for this timely topic and having me here to present on impact on cancer. And the former presentation with Dr. Madhu Bhaskaran and Dr. Anubham Kumar was an excellent presentation. And I'm going forward with this slide just to calm down all the fires which we have seen earlier. So it is just a meme from Twitter which showed how it started versus how it's going, which shows the left side shows a picture from the the thriving ice cap we had before, and the other picture shows how it is melting and the polar bear suffering from those. So it is shown that in the recent studies, like if the climate change continues like that, the polar bear will be extinct in 2100. Again, there was an excellent presentation, and they have depicted all the global, the greenhouse gas effects and the global warming. I'm directly going into the impact on cancer. So cancer, as all know, is predicted to be the leading cause of death in 21st century. It is estimated nearly 10 million people worldwide will die from cancer this year. Globally, cancer is the second leading cause of death. So over the past years, because of all excellent research and accomplishment, we have transformed cancer from a death sentence to a frequent, preventable, and potentially curable disease with all other factors we did, with control of cancerous factors, improvement in early detection, and development of effective cancer therapies. So the prospects for future progress in cancer prevention and control in this century is very bright, but we still face an easily overlooked threat from the climate change, which can impact a great threat to the cancer patient, the patients with cancer with the exposure to high risk factors. So this is a little synopsis of how climate change can impact on cancer. So the major ones like air pollution, ultraviolet radiation exposure, environmental toxins, infectious agents, and of course, disruption of healthcare. So air pollution, I'm not going into much detail. I know Dr. Anubham Kumar has excellently depicted all the effects of air pollution. So again, air pollution is a well-established risk factor for lung cancer. Burning fossil fuels adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which causes climate change and creates pollution in form of fine particulate matter, which is related to the numerous adverse health outcomes, including lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other respiratory diseases. Populations with pre-existing health issues, such as respiratory diseases and lung cancer, are at an increased risk from harm from these airborne particles. Lung cancer already, it's the primary cause of cancer death worldwide, is expected to increase because of this escalating exposure to the particulate matter in air pollution. It is estimated to be responsible for as much as 15% increase in new cases. The effects of air pollution are particularly concerning for patients with lung cancer, considering they already have these known risk factors. One, immunosuppression from their cancer treatment, and in most cases, they have an underlying lung disease. So the recent epidemiologic studies have shown that exposure to air pollution increases the incidence and mortality from lung cancer. Lung cancer risk associated with the particulate matter exposure is greatest for former smokers, followed by never smokers, and then current smokers as per the recent data. And exposure to air pollution after being diagnosed with lung cancer shortens survival. Next, I'm moving on to ultraviolet radiation. So the most common skin cancers are basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and malignant melanoma, of which malignant melanoma is very lethal. So exposure to ultraviolet radiation is recognized as a risk factor in all these three malignancies. But with the current climate change, it is suggested that winter will become wetter and the summer will become drier. So with warmer and drier summers, there is an increased tendency to spend more time outdoors, which will increase the population exposure to sunlight and the UV radiation associated with it. And the increasing temperature could make the carcinogenic effect of UV radiation even more lethal. So this is kind of, even the climate change with ultraviolet radiation and the behavioral effect, what happens with the climate change is going to expose patients or people with more ultraviolet radiation and increase the risk of skin cancer. And also want to add two more, the nutrition and food supply effect. So food production is going to be affected by rising temperature. So extreme weather events by hurricanes and typhoons and the increase in ground level ozone effect and the sea level rise will affect the ability of the world production quality food. And this is likely to have some effects on diet related cancers as well. Healthy diet, we all know, protects against colorectal cancer and breast cancer. And sedentary lifestyle and poor diets are additional risk factors for cancer. We move on to environmental toxins. Increase in global temperature are expected to cause major changes in weather patterns, leading to natural disaster. These catastrophes are likely to increase exposure to carcinogen. Examples are events observed with recent natural disasters like wildfires that ravaged California in 2020. The increase in air pollution made the San Francisco Bay Area quality the worst in the world. Flooding of chemical plant and oil refineries caused by Hurricane Harvey in Texas in 2017 caused to release a large amount of carcinogenic substance into the Houston area. So these are all consequences of climate change and exposure. Moving on to infectious agents. So climate change is expected to have substantial effect on the burden of infectious disease that are transmitted by insect vectors. As these insect vectors or carriers move to a new area because of climate change and environmental degradation, diseases not formally formed in those areas can spread and can jump from animals to humans. So COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 is thought to have jumped from bats to human at a wet market in Wuhan, China. It is predicted that the earthworms and rainfall pattern change will be seeing more and more pandemic in the coming decades. So pandemics, as we all know now, that will have a most profound effects on our most vulnerable patients, including patients with cancer, significantly increase the risk of those patients contracting a contagion as well as dying from it. Several observational studies show, in general, patients with cancer are at increased risk for COVID-19 complications, including hospitalization and death. COVID-19 and Cancer Consortium cohort study, they included 108,018 patients with active or previous hematologic or invasive solid malignancies. And of the studies, 26% of the patients showed that they all required hospitalization or mechanical ventilation and even had caused death. The next is how the climate change is impacting cancer care. So we all know what is the acute changes, what happens with climate change, air pollution and other things. But what are the long-term consequences, what happens with climate change? So cancer care is a complex system which requires multiple subspecialties and multiple researchers to get into place where we are here now. So it includes prevention, early detection, treatment, and survivorship, which is a long-term care for cancer. So how is climate change going to affect that? They will affect the ability to provide our current standard of care for patients with cancer. The disasters can cause major disruptions to medical care, delaying routine screenings, diagnosis, and treatment of cancer, ultimately increasing mortality rate. The natural disasters can damage essential infrastructure, interrupt medication supply chains, and lead even to loss of medical records with natural disaster. Patients may have problems getting access to medications they need. They may not be able to save medications at a temperature to pursue the maximum efficacy, interruptions in drug supply chains, and consequent shortages as we are witnessing now with COVID-19 pandemic. So the current COVID-19 pandemic and the recent extreme weather events have had significant negative impact on cancer care outcomes. So data from the electronic medical record company, they showed their appointments for screenings for cancer of cervix and breast, they were down between 86% and 94% in March 2020, compared with the volume in 3 years before the first case of COVID-19 was detected in United States. And more patients, we all know, seeing that right now, that more patients are presenting with later stage disease. So modeling the effect of COVID-19 on cancer screening and treatment of breast and colorectal cancer over the next decades, it's estimated that almost 10,000 excess deaths are possible. And now, again, we know that accrual to clinical trials have slowed across the National Cancer Institute clinical trials network. 50% reduction in patient accrual to clinical trials will undoubtedly lead to delay in treatment that would improve outcome of patients with cancer in future. Again, severe weather events will make it more difficult to engage in face-to-face encounters, and all the medical events will be postponed, canceled, or presented in virtual formats, as we all know, and we are going through that right now. And large-scale virtual meetings with real-time presentation and enduring presentation and videos are possible, but the full impacts are not yet known. So there's an editorial in Lancet Oncology stated that innumerable opportunities for discussion, collaboration will be lost. The latest research will not be presented, and the patient will subsequently be affected by the delay in dissemination of information on the latest treatment to their doctors. So what can we do? There is not much, things can be done, but again, there are a lot of efforts from the nation and from all over the countries which are happening. So there are three major changes they are doing. One is policy changes. So policy changes include in energy, transportation, agriculture. United States and all other major countries are part of it. The climate mitigation efforts have health co-benefits, especially benefits to cancer prevention and outcome. One of the policy changes is the Paris Agreement the United States have gone back to now. And with the recent change, and we all knew on the Earth Day, President Biden has given a comment how United States will be part of the changes with the Paris Agreement. The second part will be mitigation effects. That is how to educate the public on the risk of air pollution, exposure to UV rays. Those are the mitigation effects. And finally, the important one is strengthening the healthcare system, anticipating the challenges of disruption likely to happen with the climate change, as we are all going through right now. So, that's all. By that, I'm ending my presentation. These are my references, and thank you.
Thank you, Nisha. That was excellent. We are going to take a 15 minutes break. So this is 7:03, so we'll come back around 7:18. So you all can take a short break. Our next speaker is actually talking all the way from India. So we'll have a 15-minute break. We have one more presentation, a very important one after this. So please don't leave. Just come back after 15 minutes. Thank you.
So Khalil, can we also have, we can have people can unmute and, comment or post questions here if someone wants to chat. Or...
Yep, that's perfectly fine. Or sing. We have a lot of talents here.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Anupam to volunteer.
What freeze over the screen? Your screen freeze Your screen freeze Something is wrong with this. What
of the Thrissur Heart Hospital. She's also doing a lot of community-led initiatives at the national level and also at the state level for the American College of Physicians. So.
Thank you, Nisha. Can you see my slides?
Not yet. You have to share the screen.
Can you see now? Can you see now?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, Nisha, for the introduction, and thank you to ACP leadership, AKMG leadership here, Dr. Khalil Ashraf, the president of AKMG, for having conceived this idea of having a very important topic of this century, climate change, and thank you for inviting me as a speaker here. First of all, this important topic on climate change at a very crucial time of this century. I mean, apart from the second C of COVID, this is this C of COVID, the next C, the alphabet C, seems to be very important at this point. People are trying to make a lot of changes now, and this is the time to act. So let me just walk you through, Nisha mentioned how I moved back from California back to Canada, and I want to take you through the journey, a little bit of a background of what has happened in the last few decades when we, perhaps most of us, did our medical school, and what has happened since then. This is Kerala. This is from 1984 to 2020. As you can see, the green cover of Kerala, the God's own country, has been gradually become brown. A lot of the greenery has disappeared just in the last few decades. So this is alarming, and this has to be addressed. And this is a change that I noticed when I moved back. I was shocked at the change, rapid change. And this is not just Kerala, everywhere. This has been changing, and it has been impacting the health of people. So as we clinicians look at this whole process, let's see what we can do. Let's look at actionable items that we are responsible for. Like what I mentioned, the urgent issues of this century starts with the C. The role of clinicians also start with the C. And our roles start as first, A, being a responsible citizen of this planet. Second, as a physician leader. And third, as a patient educator. So 3 roles that we play on a daily life, in our daily life as a leader and as an educator. Let's look at one by one. Today, as a responsible citizen, we have been using plastic on a daily basis. So plastic manufacturing and its disposal is a very energy efficient, energy intensive process. And it's an environmental injustice if we do not recycle them, if we do not appropriately handle them. The Environmental Agency study has shown that just using a cloth bag instead of a plastic bag decreases our carbon footprint. It takes about 131 times. We can use the cloth bags about 131 times more than a plastic. Biodegradable water bottles, they are available. We give employment for people, rural folks. That is the other intention of this whole thing. So we can use biodegradable bottles, biodegradable bags. The second thing that we can be aware of is just being mindful of is our driving. Electric cars are there, of course. Apart from that, we can be on a daily basis when we are driving, like during pandemic has taught us something very important. that every time we step out of the house, we're thinking, is this journey necessary, right? Is this drive really necessary? So we can start right from there. Going gentle on the gas and brakes, going gentle on checking our tire pressure, making sure that our car is serviced properly. All these reduce the energy that is used for our drives. Of course, I mean, if you stay close to work, I mean, biking, cycling, biking, walk, take a walk to your, if you're close by, you can take a walk and it gives you an exercise as well. So such small things on a daily basis goes a long way to save the environment. Now let's look at physician leaders. Some of us are leading organizations. We are in various committees. We are part of planning meetings, board meetings. What can we as healthcare industry leaders do? First of all, we need to be aware that healthcare industry is a major source of CO2 emission. 30% of total public health sector emissions are caused by healthcare industry. So we are equally responsible. Why? Because all our disposal processes are high energy. We can't just reuse syringes, right? So the disposal process, but then where can we cut our emissions? Where can we reduce our carbon footprint? First of all, let's reduce our energy use by taking actions in insulation. I mean, when you design your buildings, you can be more careful about the insulation processes. Heating and lighting, just being more aware of it, switching off the computers, switching off the monitors when they are not in use. Perhaps using intelligent switches.
You guys can go and sleep, please.
And optimizing transport of staff, renewable energy for hospital fleet, carpooling. I mean, we can use a buddy system to transport ourselves, right? Alternate modes of transportation, like what I said, creating shower rooms, changing rooms, simple things that we can use to enhance that environmental friendly approach to the transportation. The third most important thing that we can do is resource stewardship to reduce, recycle, and proper disposal of biohazard waste. If one wrongly puts a recyclable waste into a biohazard container, that itself is a gross injustice for the environment. Medication management. As physicians, we can be very judicious about patients' drug usage. We can be very careful about the medication management to reduce the wastage that the patient. If you're thinking that the patient may develop an allergy, smaller prescription duration, try it out and see how it goes. And then for the non-communicable diseases, you can prescribe a longer time later on if it doesn't work, or if it works, change. If it works, keep it going. Again, during the inpatient episodes, having patients' own drug, ask them to bring their own drugs and continue with that instead of starting a new one, so that with these brief inpatient episodes, we are not changing a whole lot. Carrying out regular medication reviews to make sure that we are pretty much on the same page as what patient wants to take. We are kind of making sure that it's the outpatient and inpatient episodes match. Using of starter packs of medication so that they don't waste. So the whole lot of waste management right in medication, so that we don't become a conduit for increased medication waste. Next, as leaders, when we are, if we get a chance to be part of those design meetings, if we can conceive ideas of building small clinics or even hospitals, we can think big. We can think big, and building sustainable and welcoming spaces to get well. I think just starting that thought process itself goes a long way. This is from the Kutek Hospital in Singapore. They have been leaders. They have reduced the green surface area is 3.98%, which means that the green plot ratio, which means that the vertical and the horizontal greenery is about 4 times than the land where the hospital sits in. So that's much greenery. So they've not destroyed the environment, they've made the environment better. And also the fact that when we build such green spaces, it's a very healing place. You know, when the architect who designed this building for them, he was told that when patients or visitors walk into this hospital, their blood pressure should actually drop. It should not raise. You know, it should not cause the white coat effect of the blood pressure. So thinking big, thinking sustainably about the environment is something that we can do as physician leaders. I want to show you yet another example from the Providence Newburgh Medical Center, Oregon. On-site, so they have on-site. This hospital was the first gold award winner by the US Council for Energy and Environment. They were, the hospital thought about, even though it was resource, initially they had to put a lot of investment for creating it. A lot of savings has come ever since they designed such a hospital. On-site renewable energy resources, they actually say there are 26% energy savings just by designing the hospital with the renewable energy resource. Increase use of daylight, which means you kind of control the daylight that's coming into the hospital over the period, over the hours and over the change in weather patterns, which causes a natural kind of feel to the patient. It's not dramatic for the patient and also increases the patient healing, the ICU stay and all that. Landscape roofs, again, I showed you the Singapore hospital. So a landscape roof that deflect sunlight and enhance natural ventilation. So they have 100% outside air and 100% exhaust. That means everything is fresh there. Interior courtyards. I mean, that's something that in Kerala that we had is the courtyard concept, the Navigator concept, which actually increases the chimney effect. The chimney effect of the central courtyard reduces the ambient temperature, especially for hot, humid climates like Kerala. So even when you build the hospital depending upon where you're building, you can think about the green footprint that we can establish. Water consumption, with their own design of the water piping and use of water and the recycling, 50% of reduction of water consumption for landscaping could happen at Providence Newburgh Medical Center. Next, this is resource constraint. Not really. This is my friend, Dr. Jeevan. He works, he's an alumni from Random Medical College. He works in a remote village in Jharkhand. And this is during COVID pandemic time. You don't need a HEPA filter, right? And you don't need the HVAC system. You don't need the duct system. When you want the open air, you want 100% exhaust, you can use like open air OPs. You can design nothing to design. You can just sit outside in the open air and make sure that you don't get infected with COVID. At the same time, you're doing environment such a big justice. Clinician, next role, this is the most important role that we all play as clinician, is as a patient educator. We spend most of our times counseling our patients. We kind of tell them what they should look for, what they need to do, what we can suggest for the better improvement of their health. So as a patient educator, before we educate them on the matters of climate change, we need three things. First of all, we need to understand the changing patterns of diseases due to climate change. Second is understand the background of why these patterns occur. And then third is the art of communication. How do we communicate it in such a matter that it is personal to them? It is, they don't feel like, I don't know. I mean, I don't have anything to do with climate change, something like that. So let's look at that. So first of all, let's try to understand the changing patterns of diseases. I'm not sure if somebody covered this before, but the main reasons why the climate change is causing such a change in patterns is that, first of all, let's look at so what the Himalayan glaciers are melting? So what if the water levels in the sea are rising? What if the temperature becomes warmer by a centigrade? Oh, I can run air conditioning. So how does it affect the health of people? When the snow, let's start with the polar, let's start with spring. When the snow melts earlier, when the snow starts disappearing earlier, the spring arrives earlier. So the allergy season is going to be preponed. We're going to have longer allergy seasons. So that is a matter of concern for patients who are using inhalers, patients who have allergy. Second thing is that when the water levels are rising, the monsoon patterns have been changing. I mean, if you look at the last decade in Kerala, we've been noticing increased flooding almost annually, which was never there before, which is not a very, very predictable pattern in Kerala before. But now it's becoming more predictable that we're going to have flooding during every monsoon season. So why is that? And the flooding is going to cause vector proliferation. It's going to cause diarrheal diseases. It's going to cause food scarcity, destruction of crops. The We're talking about vector proliferation. Apart from mosquitoes, there are other vectors that carry diseases. Snails, for example, mosquitoes, the intermediate hosts like the bats, bushmeat consumption. So when the food scarcity hits because the warming and when there is crops, there is a migration of population from the forest to from the forest outside the forest. The forests are getting deforested. And so people, when there is food resource scarcity, people depend on alternative food sources and wild meat consumption increases and zoonosis increases. Apart from this, there is a direct correlation between elderly deaths and due to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases just by the heat alone, direct implication of climate change on heat. This is the slide that shows the most important diseases that are directly related to the climate change. It is, as per WHO, it is said that between 2030 and 2050, climate change alone is supposed to cause 250,000 additional deaths per year due to malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. All the vector-borne diseases, malaria, dengue, West Nile virus, cholera, Lyme disease, and snail-borne schistosomiasis are all increasing because the mosquitoes and all these vectors love the warm, humid weather. So as the temperature is warming up, they're reproducing faster, they are sucking more blood meals, they enjoy that warm weather. So all these vectors are loving this warm weather, and they're going to breed and create more harm for us. The hantavirus, that outbreak happened in 1993, when US went through a period of six-year drought, and then it led to, followed by a heavy period of snow and rainfall, led to the deer mice population to increase dramatically. And all these mice who carried hantavirus for so many years came in contact with humans because of the increased precipitation, and they suddenly came in contact with humans. Like I mentioned before, the increased deaths from cardiovascular disease in elderly from heat, worsening asthma and respiratory diseases, and weather-related natural disasters. I mentioned this before, and the food scarcity that is causing. Of course, the wildfires. Every year we've been hearing about the California wildfires and the overall temperature increasing, making wildfires more frequent, increasing soot from the wildfires and more respiratory diseases. Now, let's look at the communication. How do we communicate? How do we bring this topic of climate change to our patients, to our clinics? Yeah, we're learning about all this, but how do we bring that up in our OPDs? So one way to bring this up is to make it like when they have a particular disease that's caused by climate change, and you're able to associate it with the climate change, you kind of target and bring it up during that conversation. People always ask us, why am I used to have allergies only 2 months a year, but now I'm having like 6 months a year. Why is that, doc? And then you kind of say, oh, yeah, you know what? We are seeing there's more pollen in the air because of the climate change. And this is an important consideration that pollen makes our lung condition worse. Let's look at that. Heat illnesses, there are heat strokes. We communicate to them saying that we are seeing a lot more hot days in your area because of climate change, and heat can be tough for people with breathing problems or older. Let's discuss ways we can keep you safer. Extreme events like wildfires and flooding, we tell them wildfires are becoming more common because of climate change. The smoke and the particles can travel miles away and can be dangerous to everyone. So making sure that you check your air quality before you step out of your home is something that you can do to protect your lungs. Air pollution, of course, air pollution and ozone-related diseases have increased. Climate change and air pollution are causing the same thing, right? It is caused by burning of the fossil fuels, increased soot. They make the air quality worse. They make the lung function worse. Cardiovascular diseases also increase. We kind of say, make sure you check your air quality, make sure you have an air filter. So that approach of communicating to the patient, bringing that knowledge of climate change to your clinic becomes very important. To summarize, so basically, to spread awareness, as clinicians, we have a role of spreading awareness about climate change by bringing a personally relevant information to the patient. link climate change to health when appropriate, when it's appropriate. I mean, not when, you know, a patient is coming with something else and then you kind of suddenly say climate change. You link it to the appropriate disease the patient has. It has to be actionable. Don't give them something that they can't do anything about it. Make sure that you follow it up with an advice. Like, for example, you say that, make sure you check your air quality before you step out of your home. Make sure you wear a mask. Make sure that you don't step out in the heat between 11 and 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. You kind of make it actionable, that they have something to look forward to. They feel there is something that they can do about it. The third thing is that the communication, we have to communicate in such a way that they don't feel fear or they don't feel the sense of powerlessness. They should not feel that, oh, so what? Somebody is burning fossil fuels, not me. I mean, why am I going through this allergy? Because I'm not the one who's responsible. But you shouldn't be giving them that sense of powerlessness. We have to make sure that we are all in it together. Even simple little like disposal of waste, they can make a big change. Bringing that indoor plant into their house, they can make a big change. And hence for this, we need to have more seminars like this. We need to have more sessions like this where we train the physicians for learning effective communication strategies. To summarize, we clinicians are the best suited to address climate change among society. Clinicians should understand and spread awareness of the direct and the indirect link of climate change to health. And clinicians can learn effective communication regarding matters of climate change in an effective, actionable, patient-centric manner without creating the sense of powerlessness or fear among patients. With that, I conclude my session on climate change today, and a big thank you to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Nisha, to have me here.
Thank you, Savita, and thank you for waking up so early in India. It's early Sunday morning. So our presentations are over, but we will have the session open for the next couple of, maybe 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So far, I just saw one question from Shrikala to, I think, addressed primarily to Asha. Is what's the benefit of plant-based diet and cancer prevention? So if any of you have any other questions, please unmute yourself and please feel free to ask. Anyway, I appreciate all of you giving this amazing talk. Now we know that climate change and species extinction, they are not just the concern for a few liberal tree huggers, as people used to deride them. It's a concern for everyone. It's directly impacting people's health. And as physicians, we should take a lead in addressing this and also making others aware of this. But again, I will open the mic for everyone. Please, feel free to ask questions to the panelist. And Asha, are you there? I think that first question was for you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. I think the question was plant-based diet, right? Plant-based diet and cancer risk.
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
Of course, I think that there are a lot of research going on, what factors can we do, the modifiable risk factors for cancer risk, and one among them is a plant-based diet. So for up to our topic, climate change, it's more and more the processed meat and all those things are considered to be carcinogenic. Even the processed meat has been included to grade 1 carcinogen, especially with bowel cancer and colon cancers. So plant-based diet, definitely with the fiber content and phytochemicals are leading to say that, it can decrease the cancer risk. I think we need more research into that, but definitely has a benefit.
Thank you, Asha. I have a question for Savita, since you are in Kerala. So do you see, even let's say at the national level, hospital administrations being proactive towards, all the suggestions that you had just outlined? Are people aware about sustainable solutions or implementing them in healthcare industry?
Indian Medical Association have been largely responsible for the waste disposal system here. So they are the large center for the proper disposal of waste, and they've been doing a very good job so that the waste, hospital waste, is not just dumped somewhere. So they've made sure that there is a centralized agency to do that. So that's one thing. Hospital administration, they have been, there is a lot of interest in the greenery, the upkeep of the hospital more for the patient's feeling perspective to make it more patient friendly. Just making sure that the patients, when they walk into the hospital, they feel good. The feel good, the exterior approach is definitely there. Now, I don't know, I mean, there must be some resource, I'm sure there are resource constraints when it comes to hospital administration, especially funding for hospitals, already funding staffed hospitals. You can't put in a lot of effort there, but the small epicenters, the little things that they do try to change is definitely there. I do see the trend. Especially the ICU care, the OPDs, they are all trying to make it more greener. Solar is also mandatory, like some solar energy use is mandatory by the city. So that is also enforced. So renewable energy is coming in.
So this is, yeah. Thank you. This is Deepu Sudhakaran. I have a question to Asha. So what are the effects of climate in carcinogenic fresh mutations in humans, particularly related to the food and environment?
Hey, Deepu. No, of course, the climate change with the fresh mutations, again, it's a long-term consequences where we are just paying attention to it. So definitely with the UV radiation exposure, we know that, not only it causes risk for skin cancers, but it has definitely a role in causing mutations. But if there are any particular mutation associated with that, I'm not aware of, but definitely, yes, we will see this in long term. And it's a long-term effect.
Thank you, Asha.
If I may add one quick, it's just not just mutation, but one thing that can happen even more quickly is epigenetic changes, and that is very, quicker, and it can happen from diet. There are, several studies that shows even in single generation epigenetic changes from diet, and all those things can happen, and that also can lead to problems.
Khalila, I've seen some patients who have no mutations, but fresh cancer. And I was just always wondering, was it from environmental factors? They don't have any genetic factors. So how is that affecting? How is it occurring? And so that's why I was wondering why there climate change, particularly related to it. Like food also is definitely, as you said, a factor into that.
Oh, hi, can I make a comment? I would like to, rather a request to Nigel, mainly because he is doing her climate change initiative in collaboration with the Canadian Rheumatology Association. So coming up next week, we would like to invite everybody to that session. We have eminent speakers like Mr. David Suzuki. So Nigel, if you want to say something about this upcoming session and what goals do you plan to accomplish through this session?
Sure, thank you. First of all, great talks by all speakers, and thank you for that. That's quite enlightening. I know you did, it's a little bit out of your usual talks, and you might have done quite a bit of work. I know that because I'm sweating as I prepare for this talk coming up next week. We have David Suzuki, as you all know him. He is speaking first, followed by Andre Picard. Some of you may not know Andre Picard. Andre Picard is an award-winning columnist who's just completed 30 years at Globe and Mail, which is the leading newspaper here. He is a well-revered figure, and he writes so well and speaks very well. So the two of them will start off and then followed by me. And the whole idea is to bring in the idea of the concept of sustainability into the minds of medical professionals. So you start off with the big picture, which everybody talks about. So David Suzuki will come in and talk about the environmental changes. He has done award-winning shows in multiple television channels. He's almost like the other person, I'm forgetting his name. planet Earth person, David Attenborough. He's almost the David Attenborough of Canada. So he will come in with his concept around like we have already almost missed the boat. So we have to act really quickly for the environment. And then Andre Picard is big on health measures, public health measures. So the kind of line he will be talking about is how much are we going to invest in sickness as opposed to health? Are you going to build hospitals and intensive care units, or are you going to invest in the actual health of people so that people don't reach there? So that kind of an approach is what he's going to take. And he's also going to speak about end-of-life care. Oh, you want to join? Okay. He's going to speak about end-of-life care. So
I don't know anything about that.
Wait, okay. So what he will say is that we are prolonging life without an end goal in certain situations. So are you going to do that, continue doing that, or is there a logical endpoint? Once we reach there, we have to pull the plug and say that this is it. And so because otherwise there's extensive expenses that come out in that end of life scenario. So that kind of an approach. And then I'll come in with what we as physicians need to consider. So big picture environment, then health, public health, and then medicine, practice of medicine. So what I'm hoping to cover is sustainability issues around, for example, increasing chronic diseases, importance of having patient-centered care. Why is chronic disease not well controlled? Is pushing the pill the answer, or rather finding out why they did not adhere to the previous pill? That kind of an approach. And then hopefully we'll talk about choosing wisely. We'll talk about unnecessary investigations. We'll talk about unnecessary medications. We'll talk about biosimilars versus originator biologics. So that's the kind of line I wanted to talk about. So that's the whole picture. I'm happy to send in a registration link. It's limited for, I think, 2,000, only 2,000 people can register for this. So I'm happy to send it in for people who are interested. Of course, the CRA members will get priority, but I'm sure you all can get in if you are interested. That's it. Yeah.
Nigel, I have a quick question for you. This is Deepu again.
Yeah,
so does this climate effects like heat waves or other changes which is happening around increase the inflammation in the body, that by increasing effects of your diseases related to rheumatological diseases? Do you have any thought on it, or any research have been done on those?
Yeah, specifically on environmental effects, if we keep aside the mineral exposure and metal exposure issues and keep it exclusively to the temperature related stuff, then people have done studies in rheumatic disease. People have done studies looking at high range, people living in the high range, and the same kind of a genetic structure, people living in much lower altitudes. So you bring in two variables there. One is the altitude, the level of oxygen, and the temperature. So 2 to 3 variables there that differentiate the two groups. And there is no difference. There is no difference in terms of flares of disease, incidence of disease, prevalence of disease. There is really no difference. So that kind of a mild change may not impact disease in the short term, but the big question is in the long term. You already talked about epigenetic changes that can happen, which can happen within the medium term, and genetic changes and genomic expression changes that can happen over the long term. That definitely, we as we increase the number of people that we study in genetic studies, more and more polymorphisms in the genetic structure are being picked up. And the interesting thing is there are very, very few diseases where a single genetic hit leads to disease. Monogenic diseases are not that common. We don't see that. The vast majority of the chronic diseases that we see are polygenic in nature, right? And over a period of maybe 30 years of one person's life, you have multiple hits on different genes. And at a critical point, you just cross the threshold and you get disease. So that's quite well known. So is climate change responsible for that? maybe, but I don't have a direct evidence for that.
Thank you.
Climate change also changes our lifestyle big time. It does impose a lifestyle change on daily basis. Whether it's warm, you don't step out. I mean, right here, I mean, people stop walking anymore because the temperatures have gotten warmer, so you stop stepping out, you don't walk. And because of that, the lifestyle repeats again, which indicates the indirect effects of climate change are also responsible for some amount of inflation.
That's a good point, Savita. That's very relevant.
I think we cannot really separate the effect of climate change from the social determinants of health. Because there are people who will have to step out and walk outside in that heat. They don't have a choice, and there are people who will have the choice of not needing to step out into the heat or stay out of heat, air conditioning. So those kind of disparities, you cannot, separate them from climate change. So the immediate effects of etc. will be on the population, and the the changes in the financial status of the population will be in that people who are living on the fringes of their economic their sustenance. So I think some of these effects of climate change will be more pronounced and amplified in those populations who are already at the brink of collapse from a healthy lifestyle.
Hi, doctor. Am I audible to you? Hi, Dr. Sabita, Dr. Asha.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so my name is Sanjana. I'm a medical graduate from Kerala, and I'm looking for residency in the US. I'm deeply interested in the whole field of infectious diseases and public health. So I just want to know how can we create a baseline knowledge on how climate change affects diseases and health? What is the whole, how can we research on the same topic?
So basically researching on climate change, of course, I mean, you can look up PubMed, just look at articles on climate change, you can look at research that's happening. I believe they also large organizations have, there is a lot of funding available for climate change now. There is funding available for researchers who are interested in researching climate change. Again, like what you just these are long-term, the studies are going to be long-term. You could still do your, I mean, starting with there is a study that's going on just because of the pandemic, how the changes that has happened in the environment. I mean, there is even if you look at the Google Maps or Google Earth, you can start from there to look at the post-pandemic change in the last 2 years, how much greenery has come, how much of wild life has proliferated in parts where we wouldn't expect wildlife to be there. So start from there, and on the health outcomes, there is a lot of funding available. You have to pick it up. You have to reach out to hospitals who are and researchers who are doing the climate change. Certainly, we can provide more input.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, and if you're interested in pursuing this further, you can narrow down your, because climate change is huge. You can narrow down and focus on one particular area that you're interested in, and then try to look just to general tricks in that area. I think we have some not speaking. If you could get some feedback going.
Any other comments or questions, or otherwise we could call it a day? Nisha, you want to give some vote of thanks, and we can finish after that.
So I have to thank you, Dr. Ashraf, first for championing this cause and also supporting this idea as a SIMI. And we all know every year is hailed as the year of reckoning for climate change. And we've been listening to this for a decade. And I think 2020 has really been an eye-opener for all of us, especially in healthcare. And I'm really hopeful that this will inspire us, especially for AKMG as an organization, to take up some climate change initiatives in India or perhaps in Kerala in collaboration with the Indian Medical Association. And also, I do feel that this could be a way to restore general public's trust in the healthcare and also system. And when we talk about issues like vaccine hesitancy, the trust factor is a big discussion. And probably this is one opportunity where we can interfere to improve that aspect as well. And I'm really amazed by the enthusiasm of speakers today. As Miguel mentioned, this is not a regular topic that we discuss in a clinical practice. It takes a lot of effort to combine all the available evidence. So hats off to all our speakers for agreeing to be a part of this program and also coming out with such amazing data and presentations. So each one of you deserve a big round of applause. And again, a big thank you to Dr. Subramanya Bhatt, our president, and also all the members of the AKMG Education Committee. We look forward to seeing you all back in summer. We haven't finalized the topic yet, but there is some discussion about, doing culinary medicine, or, since I think in continuation with the climate change theme, how diet can impact our lifestyle and chronic diseases. So that might be a new topic for the next CME. Thank you again. Have a good weekend and good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.